Last week we had about 30 verses in the psalm that we were singing and reading together, so we felt like we'd make it even for you now this week by having 3 verses together. I would, as I said earlier in our service, we're talking about what it means today to be grateful together as a community, grateful for one another, grateful communally for the things in our lives. So I mentioned at the beginning of the service, if you were with us, about maybe if you'd be willing to post online something during worship today that you're grateful for. It could be a family member, something in your life. It could be something about our church. I'm not going to tell you what it has to be. Those are just some ideas. But what would it mean if collectively we were grateful today? So I invite you to think about that as we have our conversation this morning. Will you pray with me? God of love and God of grace, this is your time and we are your people. Open our hearts, our minds, and our lives to your presence that we would receive your word and respond with all that we are. Amen. This psalm, though short, gets to the heart of what we hope for as a community together. This is a psalm that is often thought of as what is called a psalm of ascent that faithful Jewish folks would say on their way to go worship at the temple in Jerusalem. It's a little different for them in day out life for worship. There were synagogues where we would maybe gather like this in your community for reading scripture and singing and praying together, but they would travel to Jerusalem for holy festivals multiple times a year to offer sacrifice, to offer specific prayers, and to be gathered as a whole community, an entire people before God to give thanks. And this was a psalm that they would offer as they made their way to Jerusalem, on their way up there. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. What is it like for us, brothers and sisters, to live together in unity? And it gives us a really interesting metaphor for how good it is. I'm very partial to this metaphor, but I understand it may not resonate with every person in this room. It's like oil upon the beard of Aaron. It's like oil anointing our heads and dripping down my beard and onto the collar of my clothes. Really interesting there, not a great 2018 metaphor, Psalm 133. Thanks for that. But this act of anointing with oil was a significant moment to set someone apart for something, to answer the call God has on your life. And when I was ordained as a pastor, they did not pour a huge vat of oil over my head to send me off. A bishop put his hands on my head. We've changed that a little bit. And yet we still anoint with oil at various times, seeking healing, seeking wholeness. The hope here is that we find our deepest peace, our deepest joy, that sense of, yes, this is how it's supposed to be. That sense of goodness is what's meant to be communicated here. Imagine like a nice spa day, a good massage, how you feel after that. That's how good it is when we live together in unity as a family, as God's children. It's like the dew on the mountains of Zion. It's like God bringing freshness and life and vibrancy, bringing us to our fullest selves. What would it look like for us to dwell together in such unity that it was like the deepest peace, the deepest joy, the deepest purpose we could ever imagine? That is the conversation we are having today, all beard metaphors aside. What does it mean for us to truly value and respect and hold one another closely in unity? There are a whole lot of things that I would offer to you in Diana Butler Bass's book, Grateful, about how she describes these things. I think there are a lot of great practical things to offer into your life, so I recommend that reading to you as part of this conversation this morning. But I felt really maybe troubled by the concept of what unity is and what unity is not in our world this week. Even just a few things that happened in my life this week that I just said, man, I would love to get together today and offer you some coaching and some help on what does it mean to grow in gratitude, but that just didn't feel right to me when multiple times this week I found myself up against things where unity would be so much better than where we are right now. I want to say first, before offering up those things, that these are really serious matters about where unity is real. I think we could talk in the big picture and talk about, can't we all just get along? Wouldn't it be great if God's love was the best thing? I've seen this post on Facebook. I really like it a lot. Like, if we spread love as easily as we spread hate, how great would the world be? I'm all on board with that. I'm absolutely on board with that. And I think that can be a wonderful starting place. But unity, what it is and what it isn't, takes root in these very painful places in our lives. So I don't want to take that lightly. I think sometimes I can talk about current events and I can talk about things happening in politics or our world or in the church. And my deepest fear is that those experiences just get cheapened because they seem like they're a bullet point in my sermon. So if you've ever experienced that when I've talked about something really heavy or painful, I apologize for that, but I want to own that. I also want to speak that any of these things that happen in our world, I speak from a place of privilege as the straight white guy who doesn't have to have some of the same risk of engaging these things from some folks who are on the ground experiencing pain, experiencing fear, on maybe the receiving end of whatever conflict and the lack of unity looks like. So I want to own my space in that conversation. And I want to invite that unity, as we talk about it this morning, being grateful for one another in unity doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that I say up here. I understand I'm on a literal platform. In some spaces, I have a literal pulpit to offer my ideas from. But that doesn't mean that, oh man, unity is you're with me or it's over. Unity may mean that we hear one another more deeply and listen for the truth of one another's stories as deeply as possible because God is in and through all of it, even in the tension, even in the conflict. So I hope we have that spirit of grace and understanding with one another as I offer up just my witness to where I feel God maybe with us or struggling with us as we seek what unity could be in our lives. This week, some Methodist pastors got together to answer a call and an invitation for unity regarding the killing of Botham Jean in Dallas. We were invited by Black pastors in our area who felt deep heartache over this man's killing and had questions. They wanted to gather respectfully at the police headquarters in Dallas to engage in conversation with Dallas police officers, to thank them for their service, to also lift up Officer Hull in Fort Worth, whose life was taken in the line of duty, and to offer up prayers for his family and their lives together. And then also to stand alongside their brothers and sisters who were white and Hispanic and men and women to talk about our shared humanity and our grief over his loss of life and the pain there. We gathered together and we prayed and we sang outside of his door and we asked for where truth and justice might be present. It was a holy time and it was also a messy time. There were many pastors who spoke from African-American perspectives, from the perspectives of those who have family who are in law enforcement. There were folks who spoke from a perspective of activists on the street, looking for systemic, holistic change to our system. And after the fact, I walked away saying, man, I feel like something holy happened here. That unity, we got a glimpse of it, even if we didn't all agree about the role of the police or the role of the pain of our African-American brothers and sisters. But something holy happened as we gathered together to pray, to sing, to grieve, to hope. And then I did something that I would recommend you never do. I went to watch this video of a news story about this gathering online, and I read the comments section. And it became really obvious to me that there is not a whole lot of unity in our community as we're grieving pain over this or distrusting one another over Botham Jean's killing. There were folks who had no room for a conversation about it at all because we need to trust our law enforcement officials. And it's a tragedy. And I agree, God is in the tragedy and the pain with the officer who took his life. Then there were other folks, a very vitriolic blog post was posted from our friends who were deeply on the ground advocating for change, who said, this gathering should have never happened because you don't go far enough. You're naming all these nice ideas and asking a lot of nice prayers, but you're not changing enough. And so you can't win for losing. It troubled me so deeply that the pain and the grief and the loss are so real that we can't even sit and hold vigil together over our fellow brother dying in his own home, being killed in his own home. And it isn't that one person is more important than another in the eyes of God, but there is real pain in our community, especially with my African-American brothers and sisters, to hear and listen to their pain. that I have not had to carry that fear or worry in my life. And that doesn't mean I don't value the work of our law enforcement officials. It doesn't mean that I don't respect and very much have gratitude for the work that they offer and the sacrifice that they offer. One doesn't have to be better than another. But the truth is, holding the grief and the pain together, that maybe we could move through distrust and hear one another more deeply. So I wonder where unity is in the midst of that. More personally, within our own community this week, I felt this struggle in my heart about what unity looks like for us within our own city limits, let alone our area. A really wonderful thing happened this week that a lot of people are grateful for. That Money Magazine named Frisco, Texas, the best place to live in America. And a few days later, a reporter from the Dallas Morning News published a story that spoke to a couple of individuals who our church has worked alongside through their journey and struggle, who don't have shelter, who don't have a home. And they offered very honestly their lack of support in a systemic way. That people individually have been very, very generous to them. That individuals have gone so far to show them kindness and compassion and walk alongside them, but they keep running into hurdles in bigger picture of how to engage all of society and how they can integrate and fully feel like they belong. We talk about everyone having a home is our mission statement here. Everyone has a spiritual, emotional, and physical home. We want to eradicate homelessness in all of its forms. And some of our neighbors asked us some real honest questions about how we're doing about that. And it made me wonder what unity looks like in our community, where many, many of us are so blessed to have what we need, and what is the most sustainable way to stand alongside our neighbors, to truly hear their stories. Does unity look like we all have to engage the same way? I don't think so. But what does unity look like for all of our neighbors to belong, for all of our neighbors to feel like this is the best place to live? I think that's a very worthy conversation for us to consider. And I also spent some time this week in a place I hope you never spend time, which is in a Facebook group with United Methodist clergy talking about the future of our denomination. The United Methodist Church has deep, deep division over LGBTQ inclusion. We're going to be talking about this as a church over the next few months together. In February, there's a big global Methodist conference that Joe Stobaugh, Reverend Joe Stobaugh, is a representative there, a delegate to, and he would, I'm sure, love to take all of your questions after worship. I know you would. But we've had some conversations with church leadership and other folks individually, and we've been having these conversations for a while. And our denomination has, since 1972, really been having conversations about LGBTQ inclusion and what does that look like. There is deep division and a deep lack of unity around the best way forward. There are multiple plans that may be considered for what unity would look like. Again, it feels like we're butting heads over, does unity mean uniformity? Uniformity of thought, uniformity of belief, uniformity of how we worship? Or can unity have more space within it for diversity of belief, thought, life, identity? These are deep questions within the walls of, at least my experience of this church, but church in general. These are questions of unity within the walls of our homes and the city that we call home. And I think questions within the heart of all of humanity when we talk about how do we live together with our different experiences. What does unity look like when we feel pain differently? When we ask different questions? When we see the world from a different point of view? At the surface level, why can't we all just get along? What does it mean to just be a nice person? Yes, that's good. And we learned those lessons in kindergarten. To be kind, to share, to listen. But if we want that true, deep joy and goodness that is alluded to in the scriptures today, that vision of God's ordained purpose in our life, of peace, of joy, of unity, it has got to be more deeply rooted in our hearts, or I'll speak for myself. It needs to be more deeply rooted in my heart about how I receive the story of my neighbor. This is where loving God and loving neighbor, what we call the greatest commandment, is cashing out in our world. And when a neighbor of mine cries out in pain, it says that I have work to do in loving them well. And at least personally, in my own faith and my own perspective in the world, I'm only loving God as well as I'm loving the people around me. Those things are interdependent. It's not that one section of my heart gets to come to church and love God all the day long, and then another section of my heart gets to handle the loving people. It is my entire self engaged in the work of love. All of my being is engaged in the work of loving God with all that I have and loving my neighbor with all that I have. So what would it mean for me not to work for unity as, oh, we all need to agree, but unity as we all belong? This happens so much in our political life, in my experience. It's about winners and losers. It's about right and wrong. And I wonder if there is a different rule, a different way of being for truth. Not that your experience and my experience are opposing all of the time if we disagree, but maybe that is not an invitation to win a battle, but it's an invitation to receive a story. Maybe it's not an invitation for retribution and revenge for all the times that the other side has hurt you, but it's an invitation to have a shared experience of holding the pain together. When I've thought about what unity could look like in a hurting Dallas area or in a hurting Frisco or in a hurting church, I wonder how well we're holding the pain together. I wonder if we're listening to, respecting, honoring, and hearing the perspective of my grieving Black neighbors who wonder, can I live in my own home safely? I wonder if I'm hearing and listening and honoring the story of my neighbor who does not have a house that I can take for granted, and hearing their struggles deeply and holding that pain alongside them. I wonder within Methodism if I'm hearing the pains of my neighbors who feel like I don't have a seat at the table. I'm not empowered to lead because of my identity as someone who is LGBTQ plus. What does it mean to hear their pain, hold their pain, respect their pain? This isn't easy work that just says, oh, we're going to solve it. And I know we hunger for that as a society, yes? Give me an answer. Give me clarity. And I know you're sitting there, yes, Marcus, give us an answer. I struggle with this as a pastor. I think so often I know there's some hope. I'm going to show up and inspire today. I'm going to motivate. I'm going to educate. I'm going to help coach us all along the way to holiness and goodness. I'm not good enough at my job to do all that every week, y'all. I don't have the capability in myself. So often what I think my role really is on the ground level is I'm walking alongside the road right with you, and if I notice something, maybe I just say, hey, look, do we see that? Or if I stub my toe on the way or you trip and fall, I say, hey, look, can we witness to that? What does it mean for God to be in the broken hearts and God to be in the pauses and God to be in the midst of our pains? I wonder if sharing the pain would help us share the truth more deeply. There's a practice I really like from another religion, from some Eastern practices. Maybe you've experienced it in your yoga class or your bar class or whatever when we use the word namaste. And it has a surface level meaning of like peace to you and things like that. There's a deeper level of that says the divine image in me recognizes and honors the divine image in you. That to me resonates very deeply with this thought in Christianity that we are all created in the image of God. I think the systems that we live in so often and the divisions that we live in, that some of it we're born into of gender and age and race, and even the economic systems that we're born into and the political systems we're born into, can put so many layers on top of that image of God within me and within you. And on that surface level, we can engage first in, I see your voting habits. I see the neighborhood you live in. I see the color of your skin. I see the gender that you show to the world. And our conversation is going to exist in those surface level things when dwelling together in this blessed unity is getting to the point where we can look through those layers and see the divine image in me, sees, respects, honors, receives the divine image in you, and I am grateful for it. I'm grateful for the fact that we share this human experience together. I'm grateful for the fact that you are not alone in your pain, because I will walk alongside you in your pain. I'm grateful for community because though I may not have answers, I may have willing hands to work for your thriving, that you might work toward mine. That's a different way of engaging with each other, though. I would love for a world where United Methodist pastors weren't looking to win arguments all the time. I would love a world where politically we weren't looking to win and have retribution or score points with those who oppose us all the time, but looked for our common shared values and humanity for the way we make policy, the way we provide for neighbors who have and have not, the ways that we find equity in the public space for those who have been oppressed, abused, assaulted, done harm to, and the ways that we choose a different way forward. What does it look like to have the imagination that God has put within us and that God sees for all of us? There's a song I really love that reminds me of this, and I have to remind myself this a lot when I find myself getting very anxious about the state of the world. At least I can be responsible for myself, and I can be responsible for how I show up in any conversation, any argument that may happen to me. Not that I would ever seek out an argument with anyone. And it may be a little cheesy to you, but it's deeply true for me. It's that the Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. It's so easy. It's so easy. So easy to love. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. It's so easy. It's so easy. So easy to love. I'm going to invite you to sing that with me in the midst of it, however you may feel with that as an aspirational goal. Let's sing that together. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. It's so easy. It's so easy. So easy to love. Let's sing that one more time together. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. The Jesus in me sees the Jesus in you. It's so easy. It's so easy, so easy to love, if it were only so, yes? I offer that as a prayer for each of us and how we might grow in gratitude together and how we might live in gratitude together. Would that be the start of our conversations about how we address our neighbors and the grief that racism has brought in our country that we still carry? In the grief and pain that homelessness and systemic injustice brings in our lives that we carry, in the pains of what it means to be the church across deep theological and relational division. Could we begin with seeing that you and I share a story, you and I share a family, you and I share a stake in this. We belong to each other and we depend on each other and we're connected to one another whether we like it or not. Would we work for each other's thriving, for the best connection that we share? May that be the truly very good and pleasant unity that would bring us our deepest joy, our deepest peace, and our deepest purpose.